as housing prices have risen to record levels, making it challenging for even families earning six-figure incomes to find affordable homes. Responding to the crisis requires creativity and persistence and what we call the three Ps. Production of new market rate and affordable housing, preservation of existing affordable and naturally affordable housing, and protection for our residents who are facing displacement and gentrification pressures. Tonight, candidates, we're going to ask you several questions to understand how you see the crisis and how you, as an elected leader from Senate District 15, would approach potential solutions. So,
all right, for our first question, as a senator, what would be your number one housing priority? We'll do 1 minute per candidate and someone who are compost. You can start us off.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that we're addressing the housing crisis. I started working on housing more than 20 years ago, and the number one priority for me would be to make sure that we create some form of nexus at the state level that would put housing development that would have a 20% affordable as well as working housing for individuals here in Silicon Valley. We need to make housing a priority because we are literally pricing out individuals that have lived here their whole life, and individuals can't afford to live in Silicon Valley. And we also have to make sure that we're holding cities accountable that believe that certain individuals should not be living in their community. We are a community of including everyone, and we need to make sure that our neighborhoods and our neighboring cities reflect that.
Question there. Okay, thank you very much. Dave Cortese, Santa Barbara County Supervisor currently, and hopefully next state senator for Senate District 15. And I want to thank Silicon Valley at Home for hosting this. Thank you to the moderators as well. But I had the opportunity as a member of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the Association of Area Governments, to appoint Leslie Corsilia, who's the executive director of this organization, to a thing called CASA, which is a regional effort to come up with much of the legislation that we've seen in the last legislative cycle to try to address the problem of housing. And my number one priority within that larger issue of housing is homelessness, the need for extremely low income housing and revenue. I co-chaired the Measure A campaign here in 2016, which created almost $1 billion of permanent supportive housing money, think studio apartments, and we have 19 projects financed at this point, and there'll be many more to come. What we haven't done here yet, and it's certainly not been done at the state, is to create an equal bucket of money, a significant bucket of money for short-term and transitional housing. We need to get people out of the creeks now. We need to get people out from under overpasses and underpasses now. And I think most of the people, including all of us here, are troubled by seeing that in our daily lives and our daily commutes.
Thank you. My name is Johnny Camus. I'm a council member of the city of San Jose. Housing has been a top priority of our city since I've been in office. I've voted for every single housing project that was feasible since I've been in office. My top priority at this point is to work on finding money so that we could spend it on our homeless mentally ill. This is a problem that is not really being addressed to the level it should be. Prop 63, which was passed back in 2004, was a tax on the rich. It was an income tax on the rich that's been collecting billions of dollars since 2004, and I've yet to see a building, come out of those funds in any area to help with the mentally ill people. So that's one of my top priorities, to help with the people that are not easily housed, the ones that are not easily housed if they're just not down and out on their luck or living in their cars. Those are the ones that are easier to house. Mentally ill people are not, and we need to do a lot more, and the state needs to get involved.
Thank you very much for holding this forum. It's a really important subject. My name is Ann Ravel, and the reason that I think housing is such a priority is it is true Not enough has happened at the state level or the county or city level, and it is a crisis. And what we can do at the state, first and foremost, is declare a state of emergency, which no one has done so far, but you can, in order to streamline and make sure that the housing that we need is fast-tracked in the state. And it's such an urgent need, we have to do it. And I, too, will prioritize affordable housing, but all housing, affordable housing, housing for the homeless, housing for students, transitional housing, all of the above are really necessary. We think that we can't do it, but we can. We have the money to do it, and we can do it. And frankly, it's a human rights violation, and we have to do it now.
Candidates, we didn't ask you to make an opening statement. We apologize. We started right off the bat. So I wanted to ask you if anybody would like to make an opening statement. I know you kind of already introduced yourself to our audience. Is there anyone that would like to add anything in terms of an opening statement? Okay, then we'll move on to the next question. You will get a closing statement, we promise. Want to talk to you a little bit about housing leadership. And for this question, we'll take 1 minute. What do you see as the role of the state in addressing the housing crisis? And please be as specific as possible.
Right. Clearly, the state has a really big role in addressing this problem, as well as local governments. For one thing, the state can obtain funding, and I know there's some bills pending now that will, and we're going to talk about them later, that will provide more funding for this. So we could do that. We can also have regulations and laws which will require certain amounts of housing, which I think is important, that each community participate and have an obligation to do so in housing. And of course, we can also require not just building, but enforce it, because we know we've had laws and they have not been enforced. We know that the largest percentage of affordable housing that was meant to be built by law has not been built, and so we need to enforce that.
Yeah, so I think the state and many other agencies have overtaxed us and overregulated us, and we're suffering because we're overregulated. CEQA reform is absolutely necessary. We need to look at ways that CEQA should be reformed, especially with frivolous lawsuits. It is incredible how an infill project takes a year and hundreds of thousands of dollars of a CEQA analysis to put a building between two other buildings. It boggles my mind that somebody would have to do that much work and pay that much money to put in a building in a downtown high density project. That's one that needs to be, reforming that process needs to happen. Other things that needs to be done is funding the mental wellness facilities that we were promised back in 2004 when we passed that tax. It's important that we have these facilities to make sure that people don't end up homeless to begin with.
Well, I think the state's role is something that you talked about right at the outset during the introductions, or part of the introductions, the 3 Ps, production, preservation, and protection. And I think if you look at the couple hundred bills that were introduced in the legislature this year, finally we're seeing action, if you will, legislative action in all those areas. Unfortunately, only a few of those bills have been brought forward, but it makes me excited to get there, to get to the state Senate, knowing that so much more can be done. I think of those, they're all important, but production is probably the most important, and it's the role where the state can play the biggest role, given its governance over 40 million people, hundreds and hundreds of cities and counties, and developers who are looking for tax incentives and economic incentives. When we introduced Measure A and passed that measure, look at what happened just by us contributing a partial amount of money toward the construction of permanent supportive housing. All of a sudden, 19 projects are cobbled together. We need to do that at the state level, and I can talk about that more later.
I think it's the responsibility of the state to set the standard of how we move forward in making sure that policy is developed so that local governments can actually adhere to some of the policies to make sure. It also means that the next senator has to be bold enough to create policy that maybe the rest of California isn't comfortable with at this point. And I created AB 2176, which at that point in 2016, members were not comfortable with. And what it did is it made sure that we created tiny homes in the city of San Jose so that we're moving individuals off the streets, out of the creeks with wraparound services so that they have an infrastructure so that they can get off their feet and on their feet so that they move forward in making sure that they can move into permanent housing. That's the type of policy. And the city of San Jose was the only city that was willing to create a pilot program to move forward. The county chose to opt out. That's not the leadership we need. We need leadership that's going to be bold.
Thank you, candidates. SB 50 was one of the most discussed housing bills this last year. It would rewrite zoning codes to allow mid-rise apartments in transit-rich and multifamily housing and job-rich areas. Do you support SB 50? Why or why not?
I support SB 50, and that's actually one of the bills that I was referring to when we have to take bold leadership. And I look forward to being a part of making sure that that bill does become law when I get there.
Yes, I've supported SB 50, but with amendments. I want to be clear about that. I've said that live and on video in the past, and it still kind of gets mischaracterized a little bit. I have the specific amendments with me here. I can't read them all in 1 minute. But height restrictions, the issues about height restrictions need to be addressed in the bill. The issues about parking take away too much local control. And there should be language in the bill that emphasizes that SB 50 should be directed to transit-rich areas. That kind of housing should be built on top of transit stations and in high-density transit areas, not in ordinary neighborhoods. I've made that clear, again, on the record, and that's my position on it. The bill actually has been suspended until next year. It's a 2-year bill. I inquired about it today. Senator Weiner's office says they're already amending the bill, and we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, so we're going to have to be asked that question again around about January. I think I'm out of time, so we'll pass it along.
Yes, I too, I have a problem with having the state government supersede zoning laws with local government, but the devil's always in the details. I could support something if I like what I see. It's not a final bill for us to make a decision on. However, I will tell you, in the city council, I've authored many memos to allow higher density along transit corridors, especially near the light rail. In fact, I've authored it 3 times and have put it forward to have reductions in costs so that these things are built much faster. We want to spur development, and that's just one way to do it.
I support some of the concepts in SB 50. I certainly support having housing built around transit. It's really important to do that. But what I don't like about the bill is, for one thing, it is not about affordable housing. It doesn't prioritize affordable housing, and I think that's problematic. And the other part of the bill that I do not feel comfortable with is some of the imposition of zoning restrictions that the locals cannot weigh in on, because I am a democracy person. I believe that people have a right to at least express their concerns about the way something is going to look in their neighborhood. And that will bring more people to the party to agree with homeless housing, with affordable housing, when they're able to say, no, we don't want that ugly monstrosity here. Can you build it in a way that is going to look more amenable so that the architecture is better and it fits more into our community? Oh, it's me again.
Thank you, candidates. And I want to ask a follow-up question because I heard this come up a few times in your answers tonight about enforcement and how the state deals with enforcement. This is a follow-up question that's not scripted. We just want your thoughts on it. Obviously, some cities are not doing their part. That's been a big source of frustration here in the Bay Area. The state does set goals, housing goals and building goals, but many of the cities around us are not meeting them, and they're not shy about that. Governor Gavin Newsom earlier this year announced a plan to punish the cities and counties that are not meeting their goals by issuing fines. And I'd like to ask every candidate on the stage, do you support this approach in terms of fining those cities and counties that are not meeting their state goals? And if not, then what else can be done to force those cities and counties to comply?
Right. I think depending on the way that it's done, that some kinds of fines might be appropriate for cities and counties if they don't meet their goals. But I think we have to be cautious about that. Personally, I could see, and I know Senator Bell in his bill that we're going to talk about later is talking about an agency that will oversee some of the housing recommendations that he's making. And I think that we should establish such an agency. And I think it should be a state agency because rather than having a local agency, there should be a state agency that has the capability of going to all the local communities and saying, this is your goal, you have this much time to do it, and try to use both the carrot and the stick.
I think we have to look at each area separately. If a city is not putting in a whole lot of jobs, you know, and not creating traffic, they should not be fined. But if they are bringing in tons of jobs and not creating housing, we should look at ways to limit their transportation dollars or something like that. I'm open to looking at ways to motivate cities to do more, especially those cities that are bringing in tons of jobs without taking the responsibility of building housing.
So the way the regional work proceeds is that there is no regional body that can impose anything on the 9-county region. There's 101 cities and 9 counties, from Marin down to where we are, San Francisco, et cetera. All of those zoning and general plans that are adopted are turned into the regional agencies so that they can knit together like a quilt what the regional plan would look like. And part of the reason for doing that is so that the region can see where the housing is planned to go by the cities so that they can put transportation for all of us next to those housing developments. What then happens is, out of the 101 cities, there's a bunch of them, sometimes it feels like a majority, who don't ever follow through and allow that housing to be built. Meanwhile, the transportation projects are going in and you don't have housing. If you drive around, you'll see that all over the place. A vacant lot next to a light rail station is an example, or a BART station. That can't happen. When that happens, GHG goes up instead of going down. It's a big problem. And the fact of the matter is, I think you get a lot further with reward instead of punishment. Give these cities planning grants. Give them opportunities to put money in their general fund for doing the right thing. I think that's the way we have to go.
The question was asked, why does the state have a responsibility around housing? Yes. And I think that if we're going to change the dynamics and get the smaller cities that surround the city of San Jose and remove the boundaries that we look at, well, this city needs to do this and this city needs to do this, we need to create a plan that actually encourages individuals, each city, to participate. And I think that you see that in the bills that are being passed at the state level. You know, SB 35, SB 50. Those are the avenues that are going to encourage the master plans on why cities need to be a part of the bigger housing production. And if housing is a priority, then cities need to make that a priority. They need to say that we're committed to making X amount of housing, developing X amount of housing in our city.
It has to be a priority. And we as citizens need to hold our local electeds accountable and not give them any room to have excuses on why they're not building housing in Silicon Valley. That really is the priority. And we as individuals, we need to hold them accountable. Punishment from the state is not going to happen. What needs to happen is we as individuals have to hold our local government accountable for participating and making sure that they're part of the solution and not the problem.
Thank you, candidates, for answering that question. And now we're going to do some fire questions. So these are going to be pretty quick. We ask you to please answer in one sentence or no more than one sentence. And we can just start right here with Nori. There are a number of bills currently sitting on the governor's desk for signature. I'm going to ask you each if you support them. The first one, do you support Senator Jim Bell's SB 5, which I know came up a couple times tonight, which would establish the Affordable Housing and Community Development Investment Program to fund the production of affordable housing?
Yes.
Yes, I support SB 5 and have actually written a letter of support. And it's exactly the kind of reward I was just talking about. Create funding, create opportunity for the cities to do the right thing.
I think it's important if you're going to pass a law like this to have accountability. The last time we had a redevelopment agency, we were funding P.F. Chang's and parking lots for Safeways. Accountabilities, if we're going to go forward with this, accountability is the answer.
I support it because I believe that it's a good thing for the state to subsidize affordable housing, and yet Senator Bell is very sensitive to local control.
We're going to lighten it up and ask you, what is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Well, I will say I live on coffee, and I love coffee ice cream.
It's so good.
I like Persian ice cream. It's saffron flavor with pistachios.
And rose water.
Yes.
My favorite too.
Coconut.
Nice.
Chocolate chip.
Nice. All right, candidates, do you
What's your favorite?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually like the Persian ice cream as well, but I would say mint chocolate chip. Candidates, do you support a statewide limit on rent increases?
That's a great question, and I think that Assemblymember Chu actually addressed that, and I think that he has a cap of 5%, and it sunsets in 2030. So I am looking forward to seeing how that is implemented and how it moves forward, and how we hold everyone accountable for making sure that it is implemented.
Yes, that's actually one of the bills that came out of the CASA process I talked about at the beginning. I'm glad to see the legislature was able to work together on it. I'll stop there.
In San Jose, we passed, with my vote, rent control that was similar to what the state passed. But I do fear that all these rent control and all these other measures are going to put a chill in people wanting to invest in our state and invest in housing, because you're going to make them afraid to invest. And in the end, you will protect the people that are in the houses, but scare away developers.
I support the Chu bill as well, because it's a reasonable way to deal with this problem, and I think it is not going to have the impact. I think unlimited rent control issues are different, but this one is a really well-crafted bill that is going to deal with the problem, and people should never have housing insecurity when they're in rentals. That is the worst problem for people who are renters.
Candidates, what was the last book that you read?
So I read a book called The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis, and it is about what happens when people are in government who don't have a clue about what they're doing. And that is a problem when somebody who hasn't been in government working in the trenches like I have is actually in public office.
Well, believe it or not, I hate public speaking. And The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie is the last book that I read.
The last book I read was actually written by a man on my staff named Enrique Flores called Barrio Side Hero, like East Side Hero, which was an organization he started. It's a great read. I highly recommend it.
Actually, I reread Kill a Mockingbird, and at some point I was watching TV, and they were talking about how it's so relevant to what's going on right now, and that they had encouraged us to go back and read it. So I read that one and remembered how chilling it is to look at what happened at that time, even could be happening right now.
Next question. Do you support tenant protections, including just cause?
So I think that when we talk about Chu's bill, he addressed a lot of those issues, and I think that's such a forward bill, and so it was so telling that he spent the time and the energy to address those two issues in his bill. So it'll be a historical year to see how that is implemented.
And you do support it?
I support his bill.
Thank you. It's certainly something I've worked on ever since I was on the city council, where I struck a compromise between landlords and tenants on just cause. Whenever the market gets this tight, this difficult, this challenging, you have to have the kind of tenant protections that just cause represents. Obviously, it's one of the 3 Ps we've been talking about all along here tonight. It's crucial to make sure that you avoid hardship to folks who are vulnerable and vulnerable to overnight eviction.
I did support a compromise at City Hall that I worked on with the rest of the city council members, but I do believe that this is actually another regulation that is scaring developers out of developing in the state of California. Again, more regulations, less of something. More taxes, less of something. If we want to continue doing what we're doing, regulating, taxing, making fees, we're going to get less of what we want, which is housing.
When I was in law school, I worked at Legal Aid in San Francisco, representing tenants who were being evicted from their homes. And I think this is really an important provision to add to legislation.
So you support it as well. Okay. Last fire question. Do you support efforts to establish a regional housing agency for the San Francisco Bay Area with the authority to place revenue measures on the ballot?
I don't think that's a bad idea to do. I would support that. I think it's important for local, especially regional areas of this state, because they have so many of the same issues that they should be able to propose such measures.
I'm not looking for another new way to tax us. We have plenty of ways that we can be taxed already. This is just one more body that's going to be able to tax our community. I'm not supportive of it.
Yeah, so this is something that I worked on very, very hard over the last couple of years, as have a lot of other people, to create the opportunity. That's what the bill stands for, 1487, to create a housing development finance corporation in the Bay Area. It could be funded any number of ways. It doesn't have to be with tax revenue. And the idea is that that agency would focus solely on contributing dollars or incrementally to affordable housing projects in the Bay Area. So I'm all for it.
Yes, and the reason I support it is when I was in the assembly, the assembly members that represent this region, we started the dialogue about how expensive it is to build housing in Silicon Valley. So we had to put a coalition together to make sure that we were educating other members throughout California that the cost to live and to build housing in Silicon Valley is not the same as building in Central Valley and other parts of California. So I do support this because we need to move forward in making sure that we can continue to build housing that is affordable for our communities here.
Thank you, candidates. The legislature recently considered a number of housing-related bills, including AB 1482, a landmark tenant protection bill, SB 330 that prohibits growth control, moratoria, and downzoning. So what other 3P solutions do you support? And for this, you'll each get 1 minute to answer.
You know, one of the bills that I think is Ting, who is in San Francisco. It's AB 1486. And what it would do is it would create an opportunity for us to build affordable housing on surplus property. And if we're thinking about our community colleges, a lot of them have surplus property. And if we're going to be innovative to think about how we build housing for our students so that they're able to live in a facility that is right next to their college, and then they don't have to worry about where they're going to live. I don't believe that it is healthy for individuals to have to live in their cars. And so I think that's an important bill. And when we think about surplus, the city of San Jose has a lot of surplus property, and I think that's another opportunity, the county, so that we can build a housing which is affordable or transitional housing for our homeless population.
Are we back to being timed again? Because I didn't see the cards going up. I thought we were past the lightning round there.
Yeah, we're doing 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, well, to answer the question, I support the bills that you cited in the question, and additional 3Ps are, I think, again, the bill that Senator Bill has out there, which is a statewide housing investment corporation, so to speak, is critical. That will spur production. The first P. In terms of preservation, I do think that we need a moratorium on the conversion of low-income properties, mobile home parks particularly. We've seen them disappearing right and left, and they're providing affordable housing for people now. And in terms of protections, we've already talked about some of the things that need to be done, and I think what's been done this year is a huge first step. I don't think we're going to protect our way into 600,000 more housing units in the Bay Area, which is what we need to keep up with job growth. I think that's going to come from production. It's going to come from tax incentives. It's going to come from financing opportunities for developers, in some cases that are provided by the state.
We need to work on supply, supply, supply. It's a simple supply and demand issue. We have nowhere near what we need in supply for housing. And we need to look at ways to streamline the CEQA laws to take away frivolous lawsuits. We need to do a negative declaration. I know this is really technical, but negative dec instead of a full EIR for infill housing. I think it's important for that to pass. We need to look away at taking away the strings for loans on low-income housing. Our housing department has to jump through so many strings. If you take money from the county, it has to come with union labor, project labor agreements, all kinds of other stuff. If you take it from another bank, it has to have local hiring. There's so many strings. I think we just take off the strings and allow our housing departments to buy the houses that are already built, buy existing homes, buy anything that has a vacancy sign on it, and that way we can have immediate low-income housing available.
I support Senator Bell's SB 6, which is to do an audit also of land and locations in each community that are available for low-income and homeless housing. And I have to say I feel very strongly about this issue because I know I used to work at the county. The county purchased City Hall in 2007, I think, when I was still there. It has been permitted to lie fallow when people wanted it for homeless housing. And even Sobrato offered $2 million to rehab it for that. And at 20, and our fellow Board of Supervisors member here voted against it being used, instead voted for it to be a parking lot. And that is an outrage.
Thank you. The next question is all about student housing insecurity specifically. So a recent statewide survey of community college students showed 19% of respondents reporting as being homeless in the last year. Here at San Jose City College, that's even higher. It's actually 1 in 4. Assemblymember Mark Berman of Palo Alto introduced a bill this session that would require community colleges to grant overnight parking to campus parking facilities for homeless students to sleep in their vehicles. What do you think of that proposal?
So I understand that the community colleges are concerned about the funding for security and for sanitary provisions so that it's comfortable for students. I mean, I think it should be funded, but it's the lowest bar ever. Really, it would be so much better to provide immediate housing for people all over the city that students could use. And it should be year-round housing. It shouldn't just be temporary. And the other issue, a lot of students have said that they're nearing homelessness, but the community colleges need to be able to understand who's at risk, talk to them, help them, give assistance to them in as many ways as possible. And if that requires state funding additionally for them to be able to do it, that's what should happen.
Actually, my wife is actually a school teacher here at San Jose City College. She used to be on the faculty, and she saw a lot of the kids that are affected and sleeping in their cars. And I've been a big advocate at City Council for the overnight parking program in our city. I've been a huge advocate of deregulating ADUs, taking away all the regulations on size and all this other stuff. We took away all the fees. We took away, we actually have a ADU Tuesday now at City Hall to help build these small units that kids can afford to live in. Plus, we are looking at innovative ways like the Graduate to allow large, tall buildings to have shared kitchens and single units. So we're looking at different ways to make college more affordable. And we've been working on these issues. I'm very passionate about those issues.
Yeah, so I support the Berman bill. I'm sorry to see it got bogged down. I told him personally that I support it. I told him personally that I'll do whatever I can to advocate for it. I've sat down with community college chancellors and one president here in the county and asked them to be open-minded about that, asked them what they need. But you're talking about building permanent housing on parking lots, and you said you're for that, not temporary housing. This is what's been a problem during this campaign so far, is you making things up. 2 minutes before that, you said that we did a bad thing by not allowing temporary housing on the parking lot behind City Hall. You know what we did instead? We cleared it so that we could put 18 stories to 20 stories of affordable housing there, including ELI housing for homeless, rather than temporary housing, rather than coming into an old rat-infested 6-story building that was leaking and band-aiding it together with $2 million and having something there that would be not only an eyesore, but would house only 1/3 of the people that we would be able to house if we did it right. So we're doing it right, and I just want to emphasize that.
I do support the Berman bill, but I think that we need to take one step more, and we need to do more for the students here at our community colleges. We just talked about surplus property. So our community colleges do have surplus property. So as they're deciding whether they're going to build permanent housing, transitional housing, or bridge housing, whether it's on campus or whether it's on county property, needs to be a priority. And as I said earlier, we can create temporary housing or bridge housing so that students have a place to live and they don't have to worry about whether they have a safe and secure place to live, but that we as government, we can make that happen. The land is available. It's the will of our electeds and our college board members to say this is what we want to do to make sure that our students have an environment where they don't have to worry about where their next place to put their head down on is going to be. Cars are not acceptable, but if that's the will of individuals to support this bill, then of course we are. But we need to think about future policies that will actually be better than that.
But a big part of that is NIMBYism, right? People are saying, not in my backyard, not here. Real quick follow-up question. How would you deal with neighbors or even teachers, even leadership at schools who have concerns about putting these kind of proposals on their land? How do you deal with NIMBYism?
Well, the one thing that I've learned in the 20 years of being in this space is that people are afraid of what they don't know. They have some idea that the person that's going to live there is someone that they can't relate to. The reality is that they're our next door neighbors. And at the end of the day, they're just down on their luck. And they're not individuals that we think they're going to destroy our neighborhood. So if it means having 5, 6 meetings with the surrounding neighborhoods and reassuring them that what they think is going to happen is not going to happen, then that's what we need to do. And it also takes bold leadership. At the end of the day, it takes bold leadership to say, I understand you're not comfortable with what we're proposing, but at the end of the day, it's not going to benefit the city as a whole if we don't build transitional housing or affordable housing or low-income housing. So I would say to them, be open, don't be afraid, and be a part of the solution.
Does anyone else want to answer the question on how do you deal with NIMBYism?
Well, first of all, ordinarily, anytime you're going to deal with development in somebody's neighborhood, you have to approach the neighborhood in a collaborative way, get people involved in the planning process, make sure they are comfortable with how things are going to go. But at the end of the day, you've got to call the question, you've got time's up, and you've got to make a decision, and that takes political will. And we could talk about safe parking in council districts that don't have any, Councilmember Camus, but actually doing it takes political will. It takes telling your district, we're going to do this on government-owned property, of which you have plenty in your district. When it came time to find a place for Hope Village, the city said they didn't want to do it. So the county had to go in and lease a piece of city property under a bill that we had to go get carried by a San Francisco assemblyman after your bill cut the county out, Assemblymember Campos. We had to go under the Ting bill and authorize a county investment in Hope Village in my district in North San Jose. So that's political will. I didn't just approve it. I went out there with my pickup truck and helped people move in. That's what I think we need to do, is we need to model that kind of behavior.
I beg you to check the facts there, Dave. I'm actually working on a parking program in my district with a church, and I've actually wrote a memo. Too bad Pierluigi isn't here. We wrote the first memo that allowed churches to house people in their facilities, and I caught hell for that. It's in the Holy Spirit Church, and it's still an active program. It's rotating. I've actually gone and served meals to many of the people in the program. It's a successful program that has been expanded throughout the city. We've been leaders on innovation, and quite frankly, I think you're throwing stones in a glass house. You're talking about you destroyed a perfectly good building that you could have refurbished in 2 years with less than $20 million, and now you're spending years and $100 million to build the same amount of units. I think you need to check your facts. And anyway, it is a valet parking lot now.
So when I came back from the Obama administration, one of the first things I did was work with Destination Home, looking at both the homeless wraparound services facility that has now been built on 2nd Street near St. James Park, and also with another one that was a low-income, mostly low-income facility that's all the way on Alum Rock. And what I discovered from doing that work was that, in fact, it is true. You can get people to agree to things that they otherwise might not want if you're willing to sit down with them, talk about the issues, try to be accommodating to some of their concerns about people hanging out in front and shooting up drugs and the things like that, because what you do is you have wraparound services that will help those people instead of having something that the neighborhood is going to be uncomfortable with.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to do a few more fire questions now. These are the ones that you answer in one sentence, if you can, please. There are a number of issues that did not pass the legislature this year, so we want to ask you if you support them. Do you support amending the state's constitution to lower the 2/3 voter threshold that is required to approve revenue measures for affordable housing to a simple 55% supermajority?
I
Do you
do.
support that? Why?
Excuse me?
Why do you support that?
Why do I support it? Because I actually don't believe in supermajorities anyway. I think it's inappropriate from a just a democratic standpoint. And it seems to me that this is such a crisis, in particular with regard to these issues. We need to have such an amendment that is going to permit us to do that.
I am not supportive of this, and I brought my tax statement, and I don't know if the cameras could see this. There's 17 different parcel taxes on top of my normal parcel tax that are already on my statement. One of the reasons why people are having trouble affording to live here, the seniors, the people who are on limited income, or the people who are barely struggling to survive, even if they are in a beautiful home that's $1 million, they can't afford the rising cost because of all the new taxation and all the new cost increases, the gasoline taxes, all the cost increases that are going to make the cost of living up. We should take a look at the damage we're doing to those people who are on that margin. Otherwise, we're going to create a whole new level of a problem. And this is why I don't support changing the tax laws.
Yeah, I do support it, and the reason I support it is because I don't think 1/3 of the people in the community should be able to veto the possibility of affordable housing for the almost 2/3 that oftentimes happens but fails that want affordable housing. The Measure A bond that I talked about passed by less than 1% on a 2/3 vote. We shouldn't have had to work that hard for it. Everybody wanted that homeless housing fund for all intents and purposes in this community. Anytime 65, 66, 67% want something like that, want to invest $950 million in affordable housing, you know that you've got a mandate, but I think 55% is plenty of mandate. And I think that people who want to oppose, the idea here, what you're asking is, should you be able to do it? Should you be able to put it on the ballot with a 55% threshold? And the opportunity to campaign against it, to vote it down for 45.5% of the people to deny it is still there if they want to do it.
Yes, I do support it, and I believe that if the majority of individuals in our county want to support and move forward in building affordable housing, that it should happen. I also want to address my former colleague's question about AB 2176, and I was the author of that bill, and I was at the table, and the only city that was willing to participate and make sure that we did the pilot program was the city of San Jose. So I do not want his comments to mislead the public. What does that mean? Is that we just need to move forward and build more housing and make sure that our electeds understand that this is a priority.
Okay, hold on to that, Mike. Next question. What was the last transit trip that you took? Lighten it up.
Mine was to San Francisco, the second big city.
My last transit trip was actually in New York City when I was going over to the UN to speak on climate. However, I have a huge number of trips back and forth to MTC in San Francisco, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, from Warm Springs to Embarcadero, which is all public record. And I'm proud of that. And actually, it's the best way to go. It's the most efficient way to get up there.
Light rail to City Hall.
I too took Caltrain to San Francisco most recently. I've also taken the train to Sacramento.
I was waiting for someone to say VTA. All right, efforts to reform Proposition 13 to have a split roll tax, which would generate billions through increased commercial property taxes. Do you support that?
So Prop 13, as I lived through it, was never intended to help businesses not pay their property taxes that they should. And so I do support it very strongly. However, I'm concerned about that particular measure, and I think we have to make sure that it's something that will be able to be implemented, because I've been told by one of my supporters, Larry Stone, that it's very difficult for assessors throughout the state to implement the way that's been written.
I do not support changes to Prop 13, and this is why. If the taxpayers, the consumers, always end up paying the bill. Do you think a corporation really pays the taxes? All they do is they raise the cost of whatever it is onto the consumer. So if you want your taxes raised, vote for it. I'm not going to support it. The fact of the matter is, you know, it will actually hurt the smaller businesses as well, because the smaller businesses like a franchise Subway, if their lease goes up by a dramatic amount and they're not able to pass on the cost to the consumers, they're just going to go out of business. So you're going to kill two birds with one stone. Kill off the commercial sector, the mom and pop stores, and you're going to hurt the consumers by having their prices go up on their cost of goods.
Yeah, in the past, I have been reluctant to support a split roll, a change to split roll, because the retail commercial part of the industry, the real estate industry, especially in our part of the area of Northern California, tend to use triple net leases and just pass those property tax increases to the merchants, which in turn pass them to the consumer. But everyone other than retail doesn't do that. And corporate profits are at an all-time high in California. We hear some people, you know, in this race talking about the fact that, you know, we're gonna hurt business. We're gonna kill business opportunities and employment. And the fact of the matter is, corporate profits are at an all-time high, and we've had unprecedented growth in this state. So I believe it's given that, combined with the fact that while that's going on at the corporate level, we have one of the worst housing crises in the history of the state. In addition, we have one of the worst school funding crises in the history of the state. So I'm supporting a change, a split roll change now, based on what I know of what's coming forward. I do support it.
I support it. I know that there is talk about making sure that mom and pop shops are not affected by the split roll. These are individuals that are predominantly families that are trying to survive. So I think they're addressing that particular issue with the split roll, and so I would be supporting it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Candace. We have a few more of these fire questions, and then we'll take audience questions and closing remarks, but we're running out of time, so we'll ask that you please limit your answers for the next few fire questions to 30 seconds. Do you support efforts to bring back redevelopment?
Absolutely. I actually took a shot at it when I was in the assembly, but the current governor at that point was not supportive of anything that had to do with bringing back redevelopment, so absolutely.
No, I don't. I do think the proper solution are things that we already talked about. The Housing Development Corporation is a much better thing. It focuses on housing. It doesn't give cities the opportunity to sort of gorge on property taxes for things that aren't important. And what Senator Bill has introduced, we've talked about several times, a statewide housing investment division would do everything that a redevelopment agency can do. He's allowing local cities to participate at will. I think that's a better way to go.
Devil's always in the details. I could be supportive. It has to have accountability measures so that we're not spending our dollars supporting like a PF Chang's like we did in San Jose. So it depends on the details.
I have to agree with that. I've sued the redevelopment agency in San Jose for the excess money that went to things like PF Chang's, like big buildings for businesses that didn't need that support, when in fact the whole point of redevelopment money is to help low-income areas that are blighted. And so I do support SB 5, though, because I think that Senator Bell has done a really good job to make sure that there's accountability and it doesn't happen again in this county.
Great. Next question is a very serious one. Where's the best place to get coffee in San Jose?
Well, as I said, this is very serious. And I think, because I'm an aficionado, I'd say the Voltaire Coffee, which is now on Market Street in San Jose. It's amazing.
All right. My mom makes the best Turkish coffee. But since you can't go there, I would say I hold my office hours at Hub's Coffee on Blossom Hill next to Outback Steakhouse every first Saturday of every month, where I invite people to come. They make a mean cup of coffee. I really like it.
At any Ethiopian community center or at the Ethiopian festival every year?
Chromatic. They have a really good coffee, and they're very innovative in taking some of your favorite other drinks and adding it into the coffee. So,
Candidates, do you support streamlining CEQA requirements to remove barriers to housing production?
absolutely. We know for a fact that 80% of the lawsuits around CEQA affect affordable housing and affect affordable housing in communities of color. So absolutely.
Yes.
I think I brought it up at least 3 times already.
So when I was county council, I had the county be the ones that did the EIRs, and it has streamlined it so well that there's fewer issues of litigation. I absolutely agree with doing that, but I believe there should be a state agency that oversees CEQA so that the purposes of the law are always respected, but we cannot have it be something that is going to hold up housing.
Do you support increased funding for tenants' legal counsel?
Well, as I said, I worked at legal aid, and my spouse worked at legal aid for many years, and there is no question that legal counsel needs to be funded better, both for housing, for tenants' rights issues, for immigration. We should be sending legal aid from the state down to the border to help those people, and for many other issues that have kept people in, particularly low-income people, in really great distress.
I have at City Hall, and I will.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we've done that at the county at a significant level around housing, around immigration, around other issues where people are disadvantaged and they need effective assistance of legal counsel.
I do, and as a member of the Latino caucus, we took that as a priority when we worked with the previous governor to make sure that immigrant populations were getting their representation.
Last fire question. If you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
To make sure that there was equity across California.
To instantly remove bad presidents.
I'd like to have the ability to look forward in the future so we could make sure we don't make some terrible mistakes.
I, too, would love to solve all our human rights problems, such as homelessness, which I think is truly a human rights problem, lack of housing, and extreme economic disparity, which we see in this community.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to audience questions. We're going to do 1 minute per question. So first question, is there any way to replace the affordable housing money lost when Governor Brown ended redevelopment? And might Governor Newsom be more open to other forms of tax increment financing?
So it's a very good question, but I think it's unlikely that the money that was lost is going to be replaced because that money has been utilized for other things. So we have to look at at the state level, we have to look at the budget as it is and maybe prioritize differently. But I'm not positive that it would happen, that there would be able to be a replacement of that money.
Well, we are talking about several assembly bills that re-establish the redevelopment agency, so it's a possibility, I think. And so I have to say, yes, it's definitely a possibility. And as long as it has some teeth behind accountability, I would probably even support it.
Under the old redevelopment law, only 20% of the redevelopment tax increment went to housing. The other 80% went to whatever the cities could justify under the blight rules. I believe that 20% should be replaced. I don't know that it should be by new redevelopment agencies. I think some of the bills and some of the legislation, some of the tools we've already talked about can replace that without creating all new redevelopment agencies.
I think that the current legislators are putting bills forward that would address that. And I think that this current Governor Newsom, would be open to that. So we're hopeful.
All right, we have one more audience question, and we're going to ask just for 30-second answers so we can wrap up. I know we've gone a little bit over our time here. Have any of you ever been to a homeless encampment?
Yes. And I actually had a personal encounter where I was physically attacked. And they asked me, would you like to press charges? And I said no. But what it did for me is help me understand that we have to put more money towards mental illness and making sure that individuals are not going without the services they need. So I have, and I think that will stay with me forever. And I don't think she meant to do it purposely. I think that there were other circumstances that were going on in her life.
Yes, I've been to many homeless encampments. I talked about Hope Village earlier. I walked through the jungle when it was there and talked to people pretty much in each and every tent to find out what their story was. And then I went to Portland with a homeless individual from here who had previously lived in Portland, went there with my wife and stayed overnight in a homeless encampment in downtown Portland. It was an eye-opener, and it was certainly a compassionate experience.
I have. I also went to Seattle. I went to Hope Village. I went to Seattle. I've had many instances where I've sat down, talked to homeless individuals. I've even cooked meals at the program at the Holy Spirit Church that is in my district, and I've cooked meals for some of the ladies in that program.
I too have been to a homeless encampment here in San Jose and the Willow Glen area. And also when I was in Washington, D.C., I went to homeless encampments. There were not as many there. In fact, they've dealt much better with homeless individuals who are on the streets. But I think one of the most important things when you go to a homeless encampment is to treat people like they're human beings, to treat them as if they are equals because they are equals. And that's what I learned from going to homeless encampments.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to candidate closing remarks, and this wraps up our forum tonight. So 1 minute for each person for your candidate closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I'm running for state senate for many of the reasons that we've discussed today, but also because I actually care about what each and every one of you thinks, and I want to give a voice to the people of this community. And it is so true that many people who go into politics are the same old, and what they want is a next job or a next higher position. And instead, I'm here because I have worked in every level of government, and I know how to get things done, and I want to get things done for this community. Please support me, and if you have any questions, if you want to email me, call me, please do so. I'd love to talk to you about what your issues are. Thank you.
Many people know that I'm an immigrant, but I actually came here as a refugee. I lived in rent-controlled housing. I was lucky enough to live in low-income housing. And I have a track record of making sure that we increase our amount of housing and the way we deal with housing in an innovative way. I've supported almost every project that have come our way with the overnight parking program, the housing at churches, extending the voucher program and increasing it to $2.5 million. But I wanted to say something different. Increasing fees and regulations and taxes will not bring us more housing. We need to look at different ways to accomplish this. And if you choose me, you'll get somebody who wants to work at solving problems. I'm not going to Sacramento to work for a party. I'm going to Sacramento to work on solving problems. I'm going to Sacramento to work for you.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this campaign, and I'd certainly love to have your support if you're a voter in Senate District 15, or if you can help in any way. The issues that I've had the opportunity to work on in Santa Clara County are the issues that are important at the state level right now, homelessness and housing. And I am, I believe, the only person up here who has actually cast a vote to put government property, not someone else's church, but government property into play for homeless housing. I've done that. I cast those votes repeatedly. You're going to need that in the state Senate. You're going to have to make the decision, I think, to start putting state surplus lands and local government surplus lands into housing production for extremely low-income housing, and that's what I intend to do. Jail reform, prison reform, climate, transportation and infrastructure, healthcare. We have the largest healthcare system in, I think, in the country now on a public basis. We've just acquired 2 hospitals, saved 450 hospital beds, and kept emergency rooms open that were in bankruptcy. And immigration, I don't think I need to say more about my work. It's been recognized at several different levels of government. So I think that's what we need at the state level, and I would love to have your support.
As my leadership on the city council and in the assembly, I was able to create housing on the transit corridors where people were not moving forward with housing. So I have the ability, I've done it when the city in the early 2001, 2003, I worked with the mayor and the current council members at that time, and we had a goal of 10,000 units to be built in the city of San Jose. And of that, we built 2,500 units in my district along the transit corridor. So I have a record. I'll refer back to a bold bill that we made sure happened in the city of San Jose, and the current council is implementing that. It's tiny homes for homeless individuals, which is emergency housing, because when we talk about homeless individuals, it's about creating a decent space for them to live with wraparound services so that they can eventually move into permanent housing. That's the leadership I bring to the state Senate. So visit me at Nora Campos for Senate 2020.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you for the candidates for your time. Have a great evening, everyone.